It's always just between us, all right?
Welcome into Between Us at 938 Live. I'm Angela Lim. Always great to have you with us, tuned into the show where we share real inspiring stories and also talk about relationship issues that matter to you. Now today my guest in the studio is Dominic Lim. He's founder of SPLAT, which incidentally he founded when he was just 19 years old. He's also head of We Care at Marine Parade. And today we're talking about his experiences working with youths at risk here in Singapore. And he's going to share some of these stories and what we all can do to support them as well. Dominic, so great to have you in the studio today.
Hi Angela, good evening.
First of all, you want to talk a bit about how you founded SPLAT in the first place at 19 years old. You know, most people are still youth, so that wouldn't really be in the forefront of a lot of our minds. Tell us why Youths at Risk was a group of people that you really wanted to talk about.
Well, Angela, looking back, I think there are three main, if I may term it that way, turning points in life that led me to start SPLAT at 19. The first is really that as a student, I'm not at all proud to say that I was in some ways a rascal at school. Broke the usual school rules. And at the same time, I was very thankful that even at that point in life when some of my classmates and myself, we gave up on ourselves and we didn't know where we were going in life or what to do, we had teachers who stood by us and refused to give up on us. So in some ways, SPLAT is really a way of giving back to really help many of these youth to find that sense of purpose and direction in life, just as how these teachers have touched us.
So it came from a very personal place, because on some level, as a young person yourself, you felt that you were labelled a certain way, that, people looked at you and thought, this guy is a bad kid. So in that way, what was the turning point for you? Were there people you met, young people you met, where you saw and you said, hey, there go I?
Well, looking back, I had some teachers who were genuinely very inspiring. They came from humble backgrounds, went through many difficult periods in their life, and they inspired us with stories, personal stories about themselves, how they overcome their difficulties and what inspired them to go into teaching. The reason I chose to study social work in university and in fact start SPLAT was because while education and teaching is important, I also wanted to do a bit more than that, to really inspire lives in a more wholesome and holistic way, which is what led me to start SPLAT.
Tell us about your first experiences as a social worker. Did you start off working with a lot of young teens?
My first experience with a social worker was not with young teens. I actually worked with their parents and families, some of whom had teenage children there. I found that for many of these children, they do have a dream, a sense of where they want to go in life. Unfortunately, along the way, when they meet roadblocks, they sometimes do a U-turn instead of jumping over the roadblocks and saying, I'm going to persevere and I'm going to succeed. Unfortunately, many of our youth at risk today come from troubled family backgrounds where they are not always at the same starting line as many of their peers. So some of the common circumstances that they faced could be single-parent families. Some of them came from families where the parents were divorced. Some of them also were born to moms who got pregnant as teenagers. Some had parents who were incarcerated as well. Yet there were also some who struggled to fit in within school. They were trying to find a sense of identity. They were looking for recognition from their peers that society couldn't give them. So, Angela, the reasons are really a whole gamut, and these are really just some that I've shared.
Right. It's great that you started off really young as well, because we want to hear a little bit more about some of the experiences you've had working with some of these youths. Were there particular people that really stuck out for you, in terms of, hey, either that reminds me of, what I've been through, or they've actually been through even worse situations?
Well, the defining period of life when I really decided to focus on youth at risk was when I did relief teaching. So I did relief teaching for about 2 months before I enlisted, so that was right after A-levels, and subsequently for another 1 year after I finished my NS. So throughout my whole first year of university, I taught for half the time, I went to school half the time. Well, I think there was 2 students that particularly stood out for me. The first was a really young girl at the age of 15. When I was the acting form teacher of a class, she was prostituting herself at night. So at night she would be at certain pubs and she would prostitute herself, and then in the day she would come back to to school to attend class. So that really stood out for me. And it really got me thinking about what leads some of this youth to do the things they do.
That's really shocking to hear, because for most of us, it's inconceivable, the idea that someone this young in Singapore had to resort to something like that. For a young teacher, especially when you're still in training, it must have been difficult for you to deal with.
I'm thankful that at that point in time I had the support of my colleagues, and more importantly, the support of her classmates. So I came to know about this because her classmates told me about it. I'm glad that we managed to build a rapport, and I was able to use that rapport to learn a lot more about their friends and what was going on in the personal lives of the students. At that time when I taught, which brings me to the case of the second student, I taught students and classes where there were frequent fights in class, where there were frequent disagreements. And what really made me take SPLAT off and say that SPLAT is going to be a youth movement that focused then on the arts is really because I saw the transformational power of the arts. I used to teach English, so whenever my students got into fights, it was very disruptive to the class. So one day I got them to, instead of writing a composition up, to put up short skits and plays about their family experiences. And they did that for the rest of the class to see. I found that the results were amazing. My students later shared with me that that was really because the plays in class helped them to appreciate the similarities that unite them rather than the differences that divide them. And it brought the truancy as well as the fights, the incidences down quite a bit. So I'm thankful for that.
It's great you mentioned the arts, because in a way a lot of these students, when they have problems or they face challenges, they keep it within themselves. The arts actually gives them an avenue, a very good channel to express themselves, on top of the fact that it bonds them, as you found out, Dominic. So we're going to hear a little bit more about any of these students that you've actually managed to walk with, or whether further on in your career as a social worker, what you've tended to discover about a lot of these teens or these youths that people label at risk. We're going to talk a little bit more about those issues in just a bit. Dominic Lim is my guest today. He's founder of SPLAT and also head of We Care at Marine Parade. Between Us will continue in just a bit. Stay tuned here on 938 Live.
Reset your relationships in Between Us. Our soulful encounter is always just between us on 938 Live.
Thanks for staying tuned to Between Us and 938 Live. Today chatting with my guest, who's Dominic Lim, founder of SPLAT and also head of We Care at Marine Parade. A social worker by training, Dominic, you found SPLAT at 19 years old when you were yourself a teen. We've talked so far about some of the students that you've encountered, many of which whose stories actually really move a lot of us. Are there any instances that moved you particularly when it comes to how they've managed to transform or change, especially after the plays you mentioned as well?
Yes, so I once had a student where at the age of 16 he was retained in secondary 3. One night he went out with some of his friends. They got into a fight. They beat someone up. They were duly arrested and charged with assault. A couple of days later, the man they beat up passed away, and the charge was amended to manslaughter. So it was really poignant for me that a young man at the age of 16 would be charged in court with manslaughter. Thankfully, because that student was repentant and he acted as a lookout, he was eventually let off with probation. I know that after that he eventually went on to Polytechnic, did well, graduated near the top of his class and went on to university. So what really stands out for me is that who we are today does not necessarily depend who we are tomorrow and who we could be in future. It's very important to always be looking at the strengths, the assets that people have, and not just their weaknesses and their flaws.
It's so easy to be horrified by something like that. You look at a young person, it's easy to be judgmental and say, this person is a bad person because, of what he's done. He's killed a man. But if you look at it in another way, which is what they have to offer, and you found that as well, Dominic, in your interactions with these people, how they're so promising, they have so much potential. What do you think accounted for the fact that this boy or this person that you've met actually managed to take himself out of that situation? What are some important factors?
Broadly, I think there are 3 important factors to look at. The first is the sense of belief that a young person has in himself or herself, as well as the belief that society has in that young person. Everyone wants to be affirmed in some ways, everyone wants to be supported in some ways, and everyone wants to be helped to achieve their dreams in some ways. So that would really be the first factor. The second factor that contributed is really the notion of second chances. And if I may add, often in the course of life, we don't just fall down in the same place once or twice. We fall down multiple times.
Yes.
And indeed, it is that belief in the human spirit that we will always be able to turn vulnerabilities into strengths, that we will always be able to put troubled past behind us to go on to succeed in life. That's the second. And I think really the third factor that helped that young man to turn around was really his family's belief in him. Families are really the closest people to ask. And at the same time, sometimes when we interact with youth at SPLAT, we find that some of the youth also share that their parents tell them that they've given up on the children, that given a choice, the parents would wish that the children had grown up a different way. I can empathize with where these parents are coming from. And at the same time, I would add that what's also important is as parents take on the role of correcting children, it's equally important to be affirming them for their strengths and what they are good at. And with strong family support, with strong support from the community, and with a high sense of self-worth put together, we have a empowered youth who, in my opinion, can change the world.
Sounds like a plan. And of course, we're going to find out more exactly about how we can do this as a community. How can we also encourage each and every young person to have that personal strength to want to persevere and push beyond any mistakes they've made? The idea of second chances, how as a society we can do that, and how parents, if you're encountering any problems right now with your child and with discipline issues, how as parents we can be more supportive. All this information coming your way. And of course, Dominic will also chat a little bit more with us about SPLAT and also We Care at Marine Parade and how we can all support all these initiatives. Dominic Lim is my guest today. We'll continue our conversation after headline news and sports. Stay tuned to your 9-3 Live.
Man is a knot into which relationships are tied, but nothing comes between us. On 938 Live. It's always just between us, all right?
Dominic Lim is my guest today here on Between Us. Thanks for staying tuned. Founder of SPLAT and head of We Care at Marine Parade. Dominic has a lot of experience working with youths at risk, and he's sharing some of the great stories with us. How they've managed to come out of a lot of judgment, a lot of mistakes, and still live up to their full potential, achieve their dreams at the same time. As Dominic tells us about the founding of SPLAT and what SPLAT is really about.
Well, Angela, SPLAT was started way back in 2006. Then I was doing my national service and I thought there must surely be a meaningful way to spend time in addition to serving the country. So a couple of us young folks, JC friends, secondary school friends, we got together one night and said, we're going to do something different. We're going to change an area that really needs the biggest change of all, which is mindsets. So when SPLAT first started in its early years, we sought to change the public's mindsets about women. We sought to highlight about getting the public to know and to praise the whole concept and notion of femininity. After 1 year of doing that, we said that, well, this is a meaningful cause. Are there any more vulnerable groups that we could reach out to? So some of my co-founders were either teachers or worked with young men from troubled backgrounds during their national service days, and we said, let's do something for youth at risk and ex-youth offenders. Truth be told, when we started SPLAT, we never expected it to grow so much and so quickly. What began as a dream among 3 people has now grown into a volunteer movement of approximately 800 volunteers whom we've worked with in the past.
That's amazing.
Yes, we started out really with visual art exhibitions because we felt that arts was really about the transformational power that it could create in people's lives. Over the years, we moved from the pure visual arts to looking at dance, drama, hip-hop, jamming. We even moved into the culinary arts, for example, all for the sole purpose of letting youth at risk and former youth offenders show the public that they have strengths, they have potentials, and they deserve a second chance.
Tell us a bit, Dominic, about some of the highlights of these 8 years now that SPLAT has been running. What are some of the programs and some of the events and activities that you guys have organized that you felt particularly proud of?
There are broadly three groups of events that I feel proud of. The first is really in our earlier years when we really began dabbling in the arts as amateurs. When we had youth from troubled backgrounds who could put such amazing art pieces together. And what we saw was that some of these youth would actually have their artworks auctioned off to raise funds for VW, voluntary welfare organizations, at as much as $400 to $500 per canvas piece.
Wow.
So that said a lot about the potentials that these youth at risk and ex-youth offenders had. At that time, we also did dance, dramas, musicals, and we were really amazed by the strengths that he had. And what gratified us was some of them said, "Thank you for bringing this program to me. I now want to go on to a career in the arts."
Wow.
So that got us. The second area that we started to delve into was about public education activities through exhibitions. So we came up with what we term as participatory exhibitions, where we interviewed a group of youth at risk, ex-youth offenders. We came up with live personas. What are some of the typical characteristics or turning points they had? We put this into posters at public places, visible ones such as the Cathay. We got the public to pen messages of support for them. And the messages of support that the public penned determined what the next poster would be 1 week later.
Right.
And we hold month-long exhibitions like that.
That's amazing. Why is it important that you get the public involved, Dominic?
Ultimately, we see Singapore as really a microcosm of a home. Singapore is really a small country. We believe that anyone and everyone can play a part to offer a second chance to youth at risk and ex-youth offenders. And every individual, every member of the public typically wears a few hats. They wear the hat of a citizen. They wear the hat of an employer or someone who's working, who's in a position to offer employment. As they also wear the hat as parents and family members to those in their families, the young persons in their families who may be going through some troubled phase of life. So we believe that when we engage a member of the public, we engage that member of a public in multiple dimensions, and he can go on to create ripples of change for so many lives.
It's amazing you mentioned this because, you know, a lot of us, when we hear about these causes, about these initiatives, we think of it as, oh, it doesn't concern us. I have my own life to lead. I have a lot of things that I'm worried about. When you put it that way, you know, the idea that all of us are part of that community. We're all different roles. We have to somewhat be responsible for them.
This notion really sank in for me during one of the lectures I attended when I was a university student. A lecturer very thoughtfully brought out that man is so different that no two men have the same fingerprints, but yet we are so similar that the anatomy of 6 billion can fit into one textbook. And it really sunk in for me then that often we choose to focus on the differences that divide us rather than the similarities that unite us. And when we become aware and truly believe that there's so much more similarities even among the disadvantaged and the vulnerable among us, we realize that we ourselves become very powerful forces for change, to change lives, which is really the greatest change we can make.
So speaking of change, we're going to find out more from Dominic today about what we can all do individually to really contribute back, and not just to youths at risk as part of SPLAT's initiatives, but also as part of We Care at Marine Parade, which Dominic will tell us more about in just a bit. Stay tuned to Between Us on 938 Live.
Reset your relationships in Between Us. Our soulful encounter is always just between us on 938 Live.
Chatting with Dominic Lim, founder of SPLAT and also head of We Care at Marine Parade. Dominic has been sharing some amazing stories of transformation when it comes to youths at risk, getting a lot of support and encouragement from various stakeholders, whether it's society, parents, teachers. Dominic, tell us more about your new project under We Care at Marine Parade. It's not just youths at risk now, is it? You're moving on to other groups also.
Yes, Angela, indeed. We Care at Marine Parade is a new project that I'm working on. It is a community enabling network within Marine Parade. We seek to turn the vulnerabilities of Marine Parade residents, especially the vulnerable ones, into their strengths. So what we do is we mobilize residents in Marine Parade to be volunteers, to really get to know their neighbors, to get to know and build relationships with the vulnerable within Marine Parade. This way we can more quickly identify those who may need some form of support, and we can support them and bring out their strengths more holistically and in a shorter time.
What are some of the groups of people that you're hoping to reach out to?
There are a few groups that we are focusing on a lot more. The first is clearly the seniors. So Marine Parade has a larger proportion of seniors compared to other areas in Singapore. So we're looking out very closely for seniors who may be socially isolated. They may not just be seniors who are living alone, because isolation doesn't just take place in its physical form. It could also be relational isolation, where they may have children but have estranged relationships. We're also keen to look a lot more at how we can help persons with mental health issues to reintegrate back into society.
Right, so that's actually quite a wide range of people that you're reaching out to, and that really ties back to what you were saying earlier, Dominic, about that all of us really have a role to play when it comes to reaching out to anyone in society that might feel a little bit left behind, or that they're a little bit more challenged than the rest of us in terms of circumstances. If you're looking at, going forward, what are some things that you feel our listeners or anyone out there, in everyday Singaporean can do just to support any of these groups of people? What would you say?
To me, volunteerism really begins at home. I think the simplest thing that we can all do is, for a start, to get to know our neighbours. To know them not just for their names, where they study or where they work, but truly to build relationships with them. To find out not just some challenges that they face, but the strengths and assets that they have that they can contribute. Beyond that, I would also encourage more to consider volunteering on a longer term basis, to really reach out to those vulnerable persons, not just within the community that they live in, but also community and the causes that they are passionate about, such as youth at risk, such as persons with mental health issues. Last but not least, I would also urge more people to consider the social services as a lifelong career. I'm a social worker by training, and I have absolutely no regrets about this career choice.
We definitely need more voices like yours, Dominic, because not a lot is known about what social work involves. What would you say, in terms of how meaningful this has been for you?
Well, Angela, ever since graduating from university, I've never had to force myself to get out of bed in the morning. I get out of bed feeling all energized because I know that today I'm not just going to transform lives, but I'm going to transform communities as well. And what really energizes me the most is that when we transform the life of an individual today, we are transforming the lives of his children tomorrow and future generations. And when we all do this together, we transform truly the future of a nation, that we lift Singapore as a country better for each generation than its last.
Beautifully said. Of course, my guest today is Dominic Lim. He's founder of SPLAT and also head of We Care at Marine Parade. If you feel strongly about something as well, or want to make that change in someone else's life, which eventually, as Dominic says, would really change a nation, really, go to this website, www.splat, spelled with triple T's rather, www.splat.org.sg. If you want to find out more, do head on to the website. Dominic, it's been so great having you on the show today.
Thank you, Angela. This
has been Between Us in 938 Live. I'm Angela Lim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Man is a knot into which relationships are tied, but nothing comes between us. On 938 Live.